The wind moved like a living thing across the high plains, low and restless, carrying the sting of snow and the smell of cedar smoke. The sky hung heavy and gray, a curtain of iron that pressed against the earth until even the horses shivered. Miles from any town, a man rode alone, his hat pulled low, his coat stiff with frost. The world had narrowed to the steady creak of saddle leather and the sound of his own breathing. Eli Carter had been riding since dawn, trying to outpace the storm that crawled over the horizon. His horse, an old roan named Jasper, stumbled once in the drifts, and Eli slowed him with a whisper. He was not the kind of man who hurried anymore. There had been a time years ago when he chased things: cattle, money, women, maybe even God. But the years had taken all that down to a single truth: survival came first, and hope was a luxury for those who had not buried it. The first flakes began to fall just as he reached the edge of the ridge. Below, the land dipped toward a dry creek bed where a small cabin stood, slouched under the weight of snow. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. He had not been back there since spring, since he buried his brother in the patch of ground behind the barn. Now it waited like a wound reopened. As he dismounted, a flicker of movement caught his eye near the corral, something pale and uncertain against the dark boards. For a moment, he thought it was the wind, twisting loose canvas, but then it shifted again, and he saw the curve of a shoulder, a figure huddled in the snow. He moved forward cautiously, one hand near his coat where his revolver hung. "Hey," he called, his voice rough from the cold. No answer. When he reached her, she was barely conscious, a woman, no older than 30, wrapped in a torn wool shawl, her hair clotted with ice. Her boots were city-made, the kind that did not belong out here. He knelt, brushing snow from her face. Her lips were blue. Her breath came in shallow tremors. She had the look of someone who had walked far past her own strength. He carried her inside, pushing the door open with his shoulder. The hinges groaned like an old animal. The fire had long gone out, and the cabin smelled of dust and memory. He laid her near the hearth, threw down wood, and struck a match. When the flames caught, light spilled over the rough-hewn walls, over the table still scarred from the last meal he'd shared with his brother, over the woman's pale face. He removed her wet gloves, set them near the fire, then wrapped her hands in a blanket. For a while he simply watched the steam rise from her skin. He had forgotten what another person's breathing sounded like inside these walls. It stirred something small in him, something he thought he had buried with his brother's name. When she woke, it was night. The wind clawed at the shutters, and snow beat against the roof in restless bursts. Her eyes opened slow, uncertain, searching the room. She tried to sit up, but he pressed a hand gently to her shoulder. "Easy," he said. "You're safe here." She blinked, voice cracked and faint. "Where?" "Near Dry Creek," he said. "Found you by the corral. You'd have frozen out there." She looked around, as though trying to remember where she was supposed to be. Then her gaze settled on him hard, studying, not the kind that begged, but the kind that measured. "I didn't think anyone lived here," she murmured. "Most days," he said. "I don't." For a while they listened to the wind. Then she spoke again, quieter. "Thank you." He nodded once, busying himself with the kettle. When he poured her a cup of hot water, her hands trembled as she took it. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, he could see that she was beautiful in a fragile, unfinished way, like something that had been through fire but not broken by it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said. After a pause, she added, "Clara Whitlow." He nodded. The name meant nothing to him, but the way she said it measured, deliberate, told him she was lying. Still, he did not press. He had his own ghosts, and it was not his habit to question another's. When she finished her drink, she turned toward the fire, eyes unfocused. The silence between them deepened, not heavy, but raw. Outside, the storm thickened, erasing the world beyond the windows. Eli watched the flames move across the logs, listening to her breathing steady. He did not know why she was there, or what road had led her through the snow to his door. But for the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt entirely empty. And somehow, that frightened him more than the storm. By morning, the world was white and still, a vast silence broken only by the slow groan of the wind pushing through the eaves. Eli rose before dawn out of habit. The storm had passed. leaving drifts high against the door and a sky so pale it looked hollow. He shoveled a path to the barn, the cold cutting sharp against his lungs, then fed the horse, checked the roof line, and stood there a while listening to the timbers creak. The land stretched out in all directions, empty and unpitying, the way he liked it. When he came back inside, Clara was awake. She sat near the hearth wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes half-lidded from exhaustion but watchful. The light caught on her face and showed the faint bruises along her jaw, old, not from the storm. She looked at him like someone waiting to see what kind of man he was. "I didn't hear you come in," she said softly. "You wouldn't," he answered, setting down his gloves. "Snow muffles everything." Her gaze followed him as he stoked the fire. "You live here alone?" "Since spring," he said. He did not add why. The grave behind the barn explained itself. Something in her posture softened, though her eyes did not. "I'm sorry," she said, almost a whisper. He nodded once, not sure if she meant the grave or something else. He poured her some coffee, thin, bitter stuff, but she thanked him as if it were gold. They ate in silence, hard biscuits dipped in broth, the fire popping like small gunshots. After a while she asked, "How far is it to town?" "Dry Creek's about 20 miles east. Not much left there, though. A saloon, a feed store, a few men who forgot how to leave." She seemed to think about that, tracing the rim of her cup. "That sounds like most towns," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "You from one?" Her hand stilled. "I was," she said. Then, after a moment, "Not anymore." He did not press. Whatever she carried, she was still carrying it. He knew that look, the same one he saw in the mirror when the nights ran long. By midday she tried to stand. He watched her stubbornness with a quiet sort of admiration. The snow outside had begun to melt under a weak sun, and she wanted to walk, to feel the earth under her boots again. She stumbled once, caught herself on the table. He moved toward her, but she shook her head. "I can manage." He stepped back. "Didn't say you couldn't." They went outside together after she insisted, bundled in his spare coat. The cold bit through even that, but she did not complain. The world was clean again, scrubbed down to its bones. The ridgeline burned silver under the sun, and their breaths hung in the air like ghosts. Eli showed her the corral, the half-collapsed barn, the line of pines along the creek. She listened quietly, her eyes drinking in the landscape like someone relearning how to see. "It's beautiful," she said at last. "It's harsh," he replied. "Maybe that's why," she said, and he found he couldn't argue. Later, as they stood by the fence, she reached out and touched one of the rails, tracing the frost with her fingers. "Your brother," she said carefully. "He died here?" He nodded. "Late winter. Fever took him quick. Didn't leave much behind but debts and silence." "I'm sorry." He looked at her then, the wind moving her hair, her face pale but strong. "Don't be," he said. "Death's just another kind of weather out here. Comes when it pleases." Her eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps recognition. "Still," she said, "you stayed. Somebody had to keep the roof standing." She smiled, small, but real. "Someone always does." That night, the temperature fell again. They sat by the fire, the air thick with the smell of pine smoke. She mended one of her gloves with a bit of thread he found in a drawer, her fingers steady despite the chill. He carved a new handle for the kettle, the sound of the knife soft and rhythmic. The quiet between them had changed it, no longer felt like distance. When the wind rose, she looked up. "You said you don't live here most days," she said. "Where do you go?" "Nowhere particular. Work comes and goes. Herding, fencing, sometimes guiding folks through the passes. Never stays long." She nodded slowly. "And when it does?" He smiled without looking up. "Then I move on." The silence stretched again, but now it felt fragile, almost tender. Outside, the wind moaned low through the trees, carrying with it the scent of snow and far-off fires. Clara leaned back, eyes half closed, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked at peace. Eli watched her a moment longer, then turned back to the flames. He did not know yet that she was running from something worse than the cold, but part of him, deep down, already suspected. The thaw came slow that week, water running in thin veins through the snow and dripping from the eaves in a rhythm like breathing. The land turned to mud and ice, stubborn in its refusal to yield fully to spring. Each morning, Eli went out to mend the fences or chop wood, and each evening he returned to find Clara waiting by the fire, a little stronger, a little less hollow around the eyes. She had begun to move through the cabin like she belonged there, not boldly, but with the quiet assurance of someone learning the rhythm of a place. She cooked when he worked, sorted tools, and once even scrubbed the table clean with melted snow and lye. He never asked her to. She just did it, and somehow the air inside grew warmer. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in gold, she stood by the window, watching the horizon. "It must be lonely," she said softly, "living like this." Eli paused at the stove. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned not to mind the quiet. It keeps a man honest." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "And what if the quiet starts to talk back?" He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you pour another cup of coffee and listen." She laughed, a low, fragile sound, but the first he'd heard from her. It filled the room like light through old glass. That night, she told him a piece of her story. Not all of it, just enough. She had come west with a man who promised her a new life. He said his name was Thomas Whitlow, though Eli doubted that was true. They'd left Kansas City with 2 wagons, but somewhere past the river, the truth began to crack. He drank, gambled, struck her once, then twice. When the last of their money was gone, he left her in a roadhouse outside Cheyenne with nothing but a shawl and her name. She'd been walking ever since. Eli listened without speaking. He had no words that could make a thing like that right. When she finished, the silence pressed close, but it was not cold anymore. It was heavy with understanding. "You should have left him sooner," he said finally. "I did," she answered. "That's why I'm still breathing." The way she said it, steady, not proud, just true, made something twist inside him. He'd known men like Whitlow. Hell, he'd ridden with worse. Once, long ago, before he learned how easily cruelty wore a man down from the inside out, he poured her another drink, and for a while they watched the fire burn low. In the days that followed, they fell into a rhythm of small labors. They fixed the roof, mended the harness, and cleared the path to the creek. He taught her how to split wood with one clean stroke, how to tell when the sky was about to turn. She learned quick and worked hard, never asking for rest. Her hands blistered and bled, but she didn't flinch. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her once. She straightened, breath ragged, eyes fierce. "I'm not proving anything," she said. "I'm surviving." He nodded. That, he understood. One evening, while he repaired a saddle out back, he saw her standing by the fence line, looking east. The wind pulled at her hair, and for a moment, she looked like part of the land, strong, solitary, half wild. But there was fear, too, hidden deep in her stillness. He called out, "You expecting someone?" Her head turned slow. "No," she said, "just remembering." That night, as the stars came out, she asked him about his brother. He hesitated, then told her about the fever, the long nights, the way the world had gone quiet when the coughing stopped, about how he'd buried the man in frozen ground with his bare hands because the shovel had broken. She listened, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You didn't leave him," she said softly. "Couldn't," he said. "Then maybe that's why you're still here." Her words lingered long after she'd gone to sleep. He sat by the fire until dawn, watching the light crawl over the floorboards, thinking of all the times he had ridden away from something that mattered. The next morning, he woke to the sound of hooves. He stepped outside, heart tight, and saw a rider in the distance, 2 of them, maybe 3 dark shapes cutting through the melting snow. Clara came to the door, pale and trembling. "Who are they?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "If it's him," she said, her voice breaking, "then he's come to finish what he started." Eli's hand went to the revolver at his belt, slow and certain. Then he picked the wrong house. The wind carried their silence between them, heavy as a promise. By the time the riders reached the ridge, the light had turned brittle, the color of bone. The sun hovered low, slicing through thin clouds, and the snow that remained glittered like shards of glass. Eli stood on the porch with his rifle resting against the rail. Beside him, Clara clutched the edge of her shawl so tightly her knuckles had gone white. 3 men rode in slow, their horses lathered and breathing steam. The one in front wore a black coat and a smile that didn't belong in that kind of cold. Even from a distance, Eli saw it, the swagger, the way he tilted in the saddle like the world owed him something. He didn't need an introduction to know who he was. "Stay inside," Eli said quietly. Clara's voice trembled. "If I do, he'll think I'm afraid." He looked at her, saw the fire that lived beneath her fear. "Sometimes fear's the smart choice," he said. "But I won't make it for you." She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, not this time." The riders stopped a few paces short of the porch. The man in black dismounted, boots crunching through the snow. His eyes found Clara first. He grinned slow, like a snake stretching after sleep. "Well," he drawled, "ain't this a surprise? I was half sure you'd frozen by now." Eli didn't move. "You lost, mister?" The man's grin widened. "Don't think so. Just came for what's mine." Clara stepped forward before Eli could speak. "I was never yours, Thomas." Her voice wavered, but it carried. "Not then, not now." Thomas laughed. "That right? You think you can just walk away, after everything I gave you?" "What you gave me," she said, "was bruises and fear." Eli shifted his stance, voice low. "You should leave." Thomas turned to him, eyes narrowing. "You, her new savior? Some hired hand-playing hero?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Just a man who doesn't hit women." Something cold passed between them, quick and sharp. The other two men dismounted, spreading out, hands near their belts. Eli noted the way they moved, too confident, too used to taking what they wanted. He felt the familiar steadiness settle into his bones, the calm that came before something broke. "You're making a mistake," Eli said. Thomas laughed again. "The only mistake was her running off with my money." Clara's breath caught. "It wasn't yours," she said. "You stole it from a family in Cheyenne." Thomas's smile faltered. "Careful what stories you tell, sweetheart." Eli's voice was steady as stone. "She's not lying, is she?" Thomas looked at him then, really looked, and saw something he didn't like. "This don't concern you." "It does now." The silence that followed was thin and dangerous. The wind had died completely. Even the trees held still. Then one of the men reached for his pistol. Eli's rifle fired once clean, without warning. The man dropped where he stood. The echo rolled down the valley like thunder. The second man froze, eyes wide, his courage evaporating into the cold. Thomas stumbled back, rage twisting his face. "You'll hang for that." Eli chambered another round. "Maybe," he said, "but not today." Thomas's hand twitched toward his gun, but Clara moved before he could draw. She stepped down into the snow, eyes burning. "You think you can hurt me again?" she said, voice shaking but fierce. "You think I'll keep running?" He stared at her, disbelief cutting through his anger. "You wouldn't dare." She took another step. "Watch me." Eli's voice came low. "Clara." She didn't look back. The two of them stood there in the dying light, Thomas with his arrogance, Clara with her defiance, and the air between them so taut it could have split. Then Thomas's hand flashed toward his holster. Eli didn't hesitate. The rifle cracked again, a short, brutal sound that scattered a flock of birds from the trees. Thomas staggered backward, clutching his side, eyes wide in disbelief. He fell into the snow without a word. The other man ran, his horse kicking up slush as he fled into the hills. The wind began again, soft and slow, as though the world had been holding its breath. For a long time no one moved. Then Clara sank to her knees beside Thomas's body. Her lips trembled not in sorrow, but in the weight of ending something that had ruled her life. Eli watched her, the gun still warm in his hands. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though tears streaked her cheeks. "He can't hurt me anymore." Eli looked toward the horizon, where the sun had slipped beneath the ridge. "No," he said, "he can't." That night, they buried Thomas near the frozen creek. No prayers, no words, just wind and snow, and the steady scrape of the shovel. When it was done, Clara stood beside the mound, staring at the raw earth. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Eli looked at her, the lantern light soft on her face. "Maybe that's the point," he said. "You get to decide." For the first time since he'd found her, she smiled, small, trembling but real. Spring came slow, reluctant as an old horse, and with it, the sound of running water returned to the land. The snow melted off the ridge, trickling into the dry creek bed until it murmured again like a voice long gone hoarse. The air softened, carrying the smell of sage and thawed soil. Each morning, Eli found Clara outside before him, her skirts damp with dew, feeding Jasper or hanging laundry in the rising light. It had been weeks since the shooting. The grave by the creek was marked only by a flat stone and the silence of the hills. They never spoke of Thomas again, though his shadow lingered some days quiet, but not unwelcome, like the memory of a storm that had finally passed. Clara changed in ways that startled him. The fear that once made her flinch at every gust of wind had burned into something steadier, like the coals of a dying fire. She worked harder than anyone Eli had known, tending the cabin, breaking the soil for a garden, repairing seams and hinges and habits. She began to hum sometimes, tuneless but soft, and the sound filled the spaces that words could not. Eli watched her without meaning to. She moved through the place like a second pulse, reshaping the quiet he had once mistaken for peace. Sometimes he caught her staring at the hills, her expression unreadable, as if listening for something that wasn't there anymore. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the ridge, they sat outside, sharing the last of the coffee. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of pine and earth. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, breaking the long silence. "Sometimes," he said. "Then I remember there's nowhere worth going." She smiled faintly. "You talk like a man who's seen too much road." He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "And you talk like someone who's still deciding where hers ends." Her eyes lowered. "Maybe I am." They didn't speak for a while. The crickets started, slow and steady, and the wind bent the grass in the fading light. "I keep thinking about the family in Cheyenne," she said quietly. "The ones he stole from. I never told them the truth, never went back." Eli leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You could," he said. "Nothing's stopping you now." She shook her head. "There's shame in it. I was part of that life, whether I wanted it or not." He studied her face, the strength beneath the guilt. "You got free," he said. "That counts for something." She turned toward him then, her eyes meeting his. "And you? What are you still paying for?" He almost smiled at that, but it faltered before it reached his eyes. "Plenty," he said, "but the debt's getting smaller." That night, they worked side by side at the table, repairing an old saddle strap. Their hands brushed once, then again, neither of them drawing away. The moment hung between them, tender and dangerous. Later, when she rose to bank the fire, he said her name soft, as though testing how it fit in his mouth. She turned, the lamplight touching her hair, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "You saved my life," she said. He shook his head. "You saved your own. I just kept the fire going." She smiled, then small, but with a warmth that reached all the way through him. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Eli." The words struck deeper than he expected. He had built his life on solitude, walled himself behind the comfort of distance. But now, with her standing there in the half-dark, he felt the quiet breaking apart, not painfully, but like ice surrendering to spring. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The days that followed carried a strange lightness. They planted rows of beans and corn in the small patch behind the barn. She stitched curtains from old flour sacks, humming under her breath. He built a new corral gate, carving her initials into the post without telling her. Some evenings they rode out to the ridge to watch the sun fall. She would rest her hand on his arm, and he would think that maybe this was what forgiveness felt like, not grand or sudden, but slow and steady, like the land itself healing after winter. One morning as they walked the fence line, she paused, pressing his hand against her middle. Her voice trembled, though her eyes shone with quiet wonder. "Eli," she whispered, "I think there's a child." For a long time, he could not speak. The world seemed to go still around them, the wind, the birds, even the sky holding its breath. Then he exhaled, laughter breaking from him like a sound he'd forgotten he could make. He pulled her close, the scent of sun and soil between them. "Then the world's finally giving something back," he said. Clara smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "Maybe it was waiting for us to be ready." They stood there a long while, the plains stretching endless around them, the wind warm and full of promise. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the river sang again, alive and certain. And for the first time in years, Eli Carter believed in tomorrow. The storm had brought her to him, half dead and broken. Now she was his reason to live, and the land, once barren, was blooming again.